Bonjour. Could you tell me who you are and where you grew up,
My name is
please?
Rose Jacobs. I was born on April 27, 1935 on Walpole Island. I was delivered by a midwife, Shauna Noak, to my parents, Emerson Sands and Mildred Sands. Our ancestors are Chippewa, Potawatomi, and Odawa. I was raised by my grandparents, Walter and Amelia Sands. I was 4 years old when my grandmother was bedridden and could not walk at that time. When she was ill, I can remember going down to the lake with my grandparents. My grandfather drove his Model T on the ice on the St. Clair River to the lake to check his muskrat traps. And my grandmother and I would go to the fish shanty so she could fish while my grandfather would check his traps in the marsh. Then my grandmother would catch a fish. She would pull it up and it would be flopping around on the shanty floor. I was 4 years old and I would scream, and my grandmother would tell me to be quiet so I wouldn't chase the fish away. When I was 5 years old, my grandparents moved to Algonac, Michigan, so I went to kindergarten at the Algonac Elementary School. We moved back to Walpole Island in the summer. The horses and the cows ran wild on the island roads. People had fences as the horses ran very fast in the herds and were mischievous. The horses would come to the river as and would swim and drink water there. The horses ran past the band council office, ferry landing, and the store. Most of the families had their own gardens. They raised chickens, and their diets consist of the wild game: pheasants, ducks, geese, deer, muskrats, and fish. Most of the men were hunters, and a lot of them worked at Chris Craft in Algonac, Michigan. The ladies were splint basket makers and sold all their baskets at the Walpole Island Fair, and would be about 20 basket stands at the fair. The Put-in Bay passenger boat would bring people from the USA to the Walpole Island Fair to buy souvenirs made by our people: carvings, baskets, beadwork, etc. One year the Lone Ranger came to the fair with his horse to perform. Walpole Island has a brass band that played their instruments during the fair. About 25 native men were in the brass band. We feel that we are in a great location, as we can go to Algonac on the ferry boat every day, or go to Chatham, Wallaceburg, or Sarnia to shop and go to the doctor. We walked across the St. Clair River in the winter to get to work, shop, or go to the Algonac Theater. I attended the Algonac High School as my grandparents lived there at that time. After high school, I went to Detroit, Michigan, and worked at Kresge's department store in Royal Oak, Michigan. After that, I met my husband Cecil Jacobs and was married at the St. John's Anglican Church on Walpole Island in 1953, and had 7 children: Dale, Jerry, Bonnie, Terry, Kim, and Judy, and Chris. I have 15 grandchildren and about 25 great-grandchildren. After I raised my children, I went to work at the plastics factory in Wallaceburg. I then attended school in Sudbury to become a teacher's aide and worked at the W.T. Lang School in Wallaceburg for 16 years, and then at the Walpole Island Elementary School for 16 years. I retired at the age of 68 years old. I had a wonderful life as God blessed me with a wonderful family and friends. Since I worked in the education system, education for my children was top priority. All 7 children received their grade 12, and my oldest son graduated from Ohio State University, and my 2 daughters graduated from Fanshawe College in London, and one daughter graduated from St. Clair College in Windsor. I'm so grateful for all their achievements. My prayers were answered. My grandmother and I, since I was about 4 years old, and I had to help her because she was bedridden and stay home with her while my grandfather went hunting down the lake and wouldn't get home till supper time. So I'd be home alone with my grandmother watching the fire and in the stove, and she could get around a little bit, but they didn't have crutches in those days, so she had to use a stool to put her knee on a stool and hop to the with the stool on her with her other foot.
What were the waters around Walpole Island like when you were growing up?
They were blue and clean and no pollution.
Were the natural resources and wildlife more abundant when you were younger?
Yes, it was. It was. My dad could go into the field and get ducks and geese and pheasants in probably a half an hour because they were so plentiful. They'd just be flying up from the cornfields.
Where were the deer nests when you were growing up?
They were in the bush, and there were a lot of bushes on Walpole Island, so they would run into our yards and everything. They were so plentiful.
What kind of game was on Walpole Island when you were younger?
Baseball. Men and ladies both had teams on Walpole Island.
Did your family speak Ojibwe or English when you were growing up?
They spoke both English and Ojibwe.
What were the biggest challenges when you were growing up?
Walking to school every day. We didn't have buses. We had to walk wherever we wanted to go, or ride a bike if we had a bike.
Do you have any weird facts about your childhood?
No, I don't.
What was your most cherished family tradition?
Making baskets with my grandmother.
Do you have any special sayings or expressions?
No.
Are there times of your life that you remember more vividly than others?
Raising my family and working for the Kent County Board of Education for 16 years and working for Walpole Island Elementary School for 16 years. So I worked with the children.
What were the wild horses like?
They were wild and they ran in herds down the roads, and they'd come out from the back of the island to swim at the river in the summertime.
What did the horses eat?
They ate the grass and hay.
Did you ever feed the horses or have any encounters with them?
No, I didn't, but my sister did. She used to ride the wild horses, catch the wild horses and ride them.
Why do you think they took the horses away?
Because they destroyed the gardens and gutted the yards and made a mess of the yards.
Do you think they should have taken the horses away?
Yes, I think they should have because of the destruction they did when they were running wild.
Did you attend school on the island or did you go to residential school?
I attended school on the island, and then my grandparents moved to Algonac, Michigan, and I went to school over there.
What was school like when you were growing up?
The Walpole Island School only had a schoolhouse with 2 rooms, the junior room and then the senior room, and all the kids went from all the grades from 1 to 8 there.
If you went to a residential school, did you get to see your parents during your time?
I did not go to residential school.
Where did you work most of your life?
I worked in the schools of education for the Kent County Board and Walpole School Board.
Do you have any children?
I have 7 children.
In the past, what was it like raising children on Walpole Island?
I didn't work until my children were all at school age, so I stayed home and took care of my children, made sure they had their breakfast and their meals and their lunches and everything every day, and I just stayed home and was a housewife.
Over time, how have you changed the way you look at people and life?
I can't remember what I wrote down. I think that people should go to church and educate their children and be with their children more, because there's so many working parents today, both mothers and fathers, where when I was a mother, ladies didn't work then full time. So they were home all the time with their children.
What did you like the most about your life?
Working in the schools and working with the children.
What do you think has stayed the same about you throughout life?
About youth?
About you.
Oh, about me.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say that one again?
What do you think has stayed the same about you throughout life?
I'm just a mother and a grandmother, and I like to be with my family, and that's what makes my life enjoyable.
What has been the most important experience in your life?
Working in the schools, I think.
Compared to today, what are the biggest differences that you've noticed on Walpole?
I think that there's more drugs today, and the people aren't safe anymore. They don't leave their doors open like they used to when I was growing up. And Walpole was a safe place long ago, and now it isn't. We have to lock our doors.
How do you think we should try to make the Ojibwe language more popular and preserve it?
I think it should be taught in schools and at home too.
What do you think has more freedom, our elders or our generation today?
The generation today.
What do you think that we should do to make Walpole Island a better place to live?
I can't think of what I wrote. I think people should start going to church and no drugs on the island. Walpole used to be a dry community. There was no alcohol allowed here on Walpole when I grew up.
Sit and cut.
How are you?
I'm fine.
What did you do for fun on the island when you were a kid and a teenager?
I went swimming every day, and we played ball.
Okay. Did the island look any different when you were younger?
Yes. The water was clean and blue, and we had many sandy beaches.
What were the houses like when you were growing up?
The houses were. There was only 500 people on the island when I was growing up. The population has grown so much more today.
Did your house have electricity when you were growing up?
No,
Where did your family go to get food or supplies that you needed when you were young?
my parents worked in Algonac, Michigan, and they shopped over there in the stores in Algonac, Michigan.
What responsibilities did you have when you were young?
I can't see that one.